Neil Harvey was one of the best batters of all time, but he did some stupid things. He came straight after Bradman, which was not ideal, and then he batted on just a little bit too long in his career, meaning his average dropped under 50. He averaged 62 over the first 8 years of his career, and then 36 over the back half. But even then he still averaged more away than he did at home, which is very rare, even probably more so for Australian batters. So you could tell, if you play 40 tests away from home and you average 50, you are a top level player. And it is that away record that is most relevant to me today, because this is a list of all the Aussie left-handers who have ever batted in India. They appear in order of the amount of runs that they made, but you can see that we've actually tagged them by their averages. And our man Neil Harvey has the best batting average of all the left-handers from Australia to ever tour India. In fact, looking at his away average compared to home, it's clear that Harvey's game worked far better when he was on the road. But it particularly worked well in Indian conditions because of how well he used his feet to the spinners. He certainly didn't invent that Australian attacking style of coming down the wicket a lot. It was there before him, and also Michael Clarke was a huge proponent of it as well. But from an Australian perspective, you would have to say that Harvey came closest to perfecting it. And in truth, he probably played in the wrong era, because the only subcontinental pitches he ever actually got to play on were in India. In Pakistan, they were still using matting when he went there, and no other subcontinental teams were playing tests at that time. And he did go there twice, and he was successful on both occasions. So he remains, over half a century later, still Australia's greatest ever left-handed batter in India. And Australia has sent a lot of southpaws over there. And that's because they have a lot. Australia has nearly scored a quarter of all runs in tests by left-handers. They produce them at a staggering level. While other countries are often scratching around looking for a good couple of options, Australia can often have up to 4 in their top 7. And they're not just picked because they're lefties. You can see that Australia also has the highest average of the southpaw batters. Other teams often pick 1 or 2 to give themselves some variety in their lineup. Australia just finds them naturally. And there have been teams with a higher percentage of left-handers in the history of cricket. But that is because Australia started so early that being left-handed was also seen as a character flaw when cricket began. So if you just start from the 1980s, when lefties are a lot more normal in cricket and in society in general, they had the most, over 40%. And there are other teams close to them. However, all these other sides have something Australia doesn't have. Left-handers who grew up with spinning conditions. Even the West Indians have Guyana and Trinidad, which is an important thing to remember because their 2 champion lefties came from those locations. And what does Australia have? The SCG, which doesn't even spin as much as it used to. So Australia is not just producing a lot of left-handers, they're producing them without great skills when it comes to the ball spinning. Now, note where Matt Hayden is on this list. He scored the most runs of an Aussie lefty in India ever. And if you go back to the start of his career, over the first 13 tests he really didn't make a lot of runs. He then almost doubled that run tally in 3 tests against India. And Hayden did all this because Australia had turned professional, so he called them up and asked if he could be part of a spin camp to Chennai, where he would train under Beatty and Prasanna. They helped him with his game and tweaked his sweep shot a little bit, and he destroyed India. But that was it. The next 2 times he came back to India, they planned far better for him, and he struggled. And to most Australians, Hayden is thought of as a great player in Indian conditions, because he mastered it once. That is how tough it has been for the Australians in India. For what it is worth, Harvey averaged over 50 on both the occasions that he went over. And if you look at how left-hand batters fare by average in each nation, you can see that India is right down the bottom here. But there is a better way to even illustrate this. India is one of only 2 places where right-handers average more than left-handers. And this is when you really start to see the issue clearly, because India is the only test nation where it is worse to be left-handed as a batter. And because of that, India actually struggles to find left-handers themselves. You can see that Australia is at the top of this list and India is at the other end. And it isn't that Indians hate them or mistrust left-handers. It's just that it's so hard for any left-hander, even one born in India, to survive and make more runs than the right-handers, so they get picked in their national team. And quite simply, that is because of how much off-spin is bowled in Indian domestic cricket. In order to be a great Indian left-hander, you at first have to be great against off-spin, which is not what left-handers typically do. And as a tourist, of course, when you travel to India, you're going to face a lot of off-spin. In the last 10 years, they've had the most off-breaks bowled in the world in India. And even then, they still have the lowest average. And it's worth noting that Sri Lanka, for instance, has more balls of off-spin per match than India did. But their average is closer to what it is in England rather than what it is in India. And of course, that overall mark is probably taken down a little bit by, this guy. And while a lot of the things we've talked about are historic, Ashwin does put a huge shadow over everything in modern cricket, and there is no doubt that his bowling has been helped by being in India a lot. However, the other side of that is whether he would have developed into anywhere near as good an off-spinner had he not been from India. And if you do want to know about Ashwin versus left-handers, I made a whole video about that, so feel free to have a look at that at the end. But as this shows, most of the Indian spinners and even most of the Indian bowlers are pretty good against left-handers regardless, inside and outside of Asia. Mohammad Siraj is really good away from Asia, while Mohammad Shami is pretty good at home or away. And Umesh Yadav is also good. And there's nothing wrong with Umesh Yadav's record either. But now we have to look at Australia's latest potential victims. Let's just focus on the left-handers on this list. David Warner struggles in Asia, against spin in Asia, and against off-spin in Asia. Usman Khawaja's numbers are actually quite good, but he has never played in India, and he averages 165 in Pakistan, but a combined 26 in his matches in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. That's not as good a sign. Travis Head has struggled in Asia, against spin, and especially against off-spin. Good luck to him playing Ashwin. Most of Alex Carey's numbers here are playing the sweep shot in Pakistan or Sri Lanka. I would assume we'd see a slight regression in his numbers, but if you want to bet on which left-hander might end up averaging the most on this tour, he's probably the most solid bet. But I want to mention one right-hander. Peter Handscomb is on tour because of three things. His innings in Ranchi, which was incredible, where he all but batted from both ends to ensure a draw for Australia and protect Shaun Marsh. But one of the other major reasons he's here is because he is right-handed. Because if you actually look at his overall numbers, they don't inspire you that much when you're looking at his record against spin in Asia. And if he comes up against Akshar and Ravi, it may not go well for him. But the other reason he is here is that this is the first year since 2016 where he's made any first-class runs. His red ball form had just completely disappeared. He hasn't actually played a test since 2019. But this year, he played 16 first-class matches and is averaging over 50. And the last time he did that was the year that Australia picked him to tour India. And Handscomb could be even more important because Cameron Green was one of the few right-handers that was an automatic selection for Australia. And him getting injured and missing the first test is not ideal. It essentially means that they are right-hander down, so either Handscomb plays or Head or Renshaw, who are, of course, both left-handers. This is a well-known thing within Australian cricket as well. In fact, it's quite well known around the world. Ben Jones and Nathan Lehman have talked about this pattern in their book. Australia turn up to India with their best batters, who just happen to be mostly left-handed, and then their team struggle more than you would think they should. The only difference now is we have the stats to completely prove it. Throwing Ashwin in, of course, just makes it all the more brutal. And I'm not sure what Australia is supposed to do. Neil Harvey is 94, Matt Hayden is busy with Pakistan, and the best left-handed batter Australia has in India available to them right at the moment is Mitchell Starc. He actually averages more in India than Warner or Renshaw. Oh, and as luck would have it, this southpaw with a 33 average in India will also be missing the first match.